The conspiracy and the story behind North Fox Island in Michigan eerily echoes the story of Jeffrey Epstein, and it has connections to a notorious string of unsolved murders that the police refuse to acknowledge. This is North Fox Island in Lake Michigan. It's a beautiful island that was once owned by a multi-millionaire. The man's name was Francis Sheldon, and he's the Epstein of this story. Now, Francis Sheldon was an interesting guy. He went to Yale, he was a descendant of a governor of the state of Michigan, and he had lots of political and business associations that would help him cover up this series of crimes. When Francis purchased North Fox Island, he installed an airstrip and built a number of buildings on the island that would eventually be turned into a boys' camp. After purchasing the island, Francis began to work with a number of local men, including this guy, Gerald S. Richards, who was a school teacher, actually a gym teacher at a local Catholic school. For years, these men ran a camp called Brother Paul's on North Fox Island, so I'm going to go into detail about what happened there in part 2. This island has one of the most disturbing histories in America, and no one really knows the full truth behind it. So like I said before, this island was owned by multi-millionaire Francis Sheldon, pictured right here. And Francis and a number of other local men from Michigan, including this guy, Gerald S. Richards, ran a boys' camp on the island. They would fly kids to the island on this airstrip, kids from the YMCA and other schools and communities in the area. And both the children and the parents of the children who attended this boys' camp were told that this was an island of fun where kids could relax. They had big brothers there. It was going to be totally safe. And this camp ran on this island for a period of years. Then one day, some of the kids who attended the camp began to tell their parents that the counselors or the teachers, the adults that were there on the island, had behaved with them in very, very inappropriate ways. They began telling their friends and parents that they were taken into these cabins pictured here on the island. They were assaulted, they were told to remove all of their clothing, and that there were cameras all over the place. Well, it turns out that this guy, the multi-millionaire with political and business connections in the area, Francis Sheldon, was running a massive CP ring. And they had been abusing the children on this island under the guise of bringing them to a boys' camp for years, recording all of it, selling it across the world. And some of the more affluent clients of their business were even allowed to take trips to the island themselves to see some of these young boys. Now, this story bears an obvious resemblance to the story of Jeffrey Epstein, but there are some very, very strange things that are happening here that nobody knows about, and the government still refuses to talk about to this day. So let's talk about this guy, Gerald S. Richards. He was a gym teacher at a local Catholic school who went down for the crimes, and he was heavily involved with every aspect of this business, if you know what I mean. Well, it seems like through his political and business connections, Francis Sheldon was actually tipped off that he was about to be arrested and raided and charged with these horrific crimes. So Francis, before he could be brought to justice for these crimes, he actually fled the country in a personal plane. He then moved to France, got remarried, and died in Amsterdam, and never had to pay for any of the crimes that were committed here. But it's when we start talking about the murders that this story really starts to blow my mind. So take a good look at this guy, Chris Bush. This is Christopher Bush's father, Harold Lee Bush. Now, he was an executive with General Motors, and the family was obviously extremely wealthy. They were politically connected, and they were very connected to every business in the area. These guys had a lot of power. But back to Christopher Bush. This guy had assaulted a number of children. He'd been let out of prison, let out of jail in a very, very suspicious way multiple times, put on bail for serious offenses. And he was an alleged associate of the crime ring that was happening on North Fox Island. Meaning that, like I said earlier, he was one of those people who could afford to actually fly out to the island to do things himself. I'm out of time. Follow for part 3. This story about unsolved murders and abuse ring found in Michigan and other things that the government has covered up is going to blow your mind. Now, this is part 3 of the story, so if you haven't seen the other parts, go watch them because it's important. But let's get back to Christopher Bush. Christopher Bush is a very important figure in this whole conspiracy, so hold on a second. I got to fill you in on the Oakland County child killings. So at the same time that kids were being flown out to that private island, they were being filmed doing extremely horrific things with adults. They were being abused. These 4 children went missing and were later found murdered in the same area. And to this day, this case has never been solved. It's called the Oakland County child killings. It's really horrific. It's really disturbing. So each of these children were abducted on a snowy night. Their bodies were found later on, days later, in public places, and they had either been strangled or shot. And interestingly, they had all been bathed, they were fully clothed, and only the 2 boys had been assaulted. Some witnesses saw the children getting into a blue Gremlin, an old vehicle with a man who resembled this, and they never found the guy, obviously. As time went on and children kept going missing and being found murdered, it gripped the communities in this area in Michigan, and it actually resulted in one of the largest manhunts ever at the time. But still, with suspect sketches, cars, everything, nobody was ever caught. And now we get back to this guy, Harold Lee Bush, an executive with General Motors, one of the biggest employers in the area at the time, very wealthy, very politically connected, and his son, Christopher Bush. Now, at the time when the Oakland County child killings were going on, Christopher Bush had recently been arrested. He was under suspicion of producing CP, if you know what I mean. He had assaulted children violently, and he was just a horrible person. And it's been alleged many, many times in the past that since the Oakland County child killings were happening 76 to 77, and this ring of CP production was happening on a nearby island from 76 to 77, they were connected. Some people believe that the children were being abducted, they were being brought out to this island, their deaths and the other things that happened to them were being filmed and sold to customers. And like I said before, Francis Sheldon, the pioneer of that whole CP ring, he fled the country and he was never questioned. He never gave any closure to the case. And this brings us back to Chris Bush. Now Chris Bush, the son of the executive, the guy that was under all this investigation and scrutiny for the abuse and for allegedly filming children, he unalived himself in 1978. But when police found the scene of his unaliving, it was highly suspicious. First of all, there was a bullet wound in the center of his forehead. He had allegedly unalived himself with a rifle, but there were 4 bullet casings found in his room. 4. There was no blood splatter on the sheets in his bed. There was no brain matter, nothing like that in the surrounding area. And I'm about to run out of time, but I got to show you the last thing that they found in the room that to me sells this whole thing that it wasn't an actual unaliving.